All right. Hi, everybody. Hi. Good evening. I'm Nancy Waxton. I am the Director of Community Engagement at the Graduate School of Social Service at Fordham. And this event is being presented by the Activism Committee of the Schools Action Committee for Racial and Social Justice. And I want to recognize my co-chair of the Activism Committee, Professor Liz Matthews, who's here. So it's really a great honor and pleasure of mine to introduce to you tonight Nora Moran, who is the Director of Policy and Advocacy at United Neighborhood Houses of New York. UNH, we can call it UNH, United Neighborhood Houses, is the association of 42, Nora? 42? 44 settlement houses and community centers. These are community-based organizations. I mean, everybody in the School of Social Work should know what a settlement house is, but in case you forgot, a settlement house is generally a community-based organization serving people of all ages through a variety of programs. In most cases, they're place-based organizations. In most cases, they have multiple sites. The United Neighborhood Houses is based mainly in New York City, but they also have some members upstate New York as well. Nora is a social worker. She graduated from the Silberman School of Social Work at Hunter College. But more importantly for us today, Nora is also a graduate of Fordham Rose Hill as an undergraduate. So welcome back to Fordham, Nora. Nora is, as the Director of Policy and Advocacy at UNH, she supervises how many? Four policy people?
4, yep.
4, yeah. And she can tell you a little more about what she does, what policy analysis is, what advocacy is, what lobbying is. These are all skills that, as a social worker, I believe, since I hired her originally at UNH, that she was notably equipped to do, because social work skills, in my view, translate very, very well into advocacy. But I wanted to invite Liz Manis, a member of our committee, who is a recent grad of GSS, that's the Graduate School of Social Service, to comment a little more about why social workers should care about advocacy. So Liz.
Hi, everybody. My name's Liz, and as Nancy said, I am a recent GSS alum, and I graduated with a clinical focus. And as a social worker, I've just felt like I've had to choose between being a clinician or focusing more on a macro level. And I think as time goes on, I'm slowly learning that I can be both, and that having the skills across both aspects is what can make me a well-rounded social worker. So I participated in student organizations, and I continue to be a part of the action committee here today that organized this event. And I just find it really important to continue to stay involved on both the macro level as well. So I'm going to pass it on to Tim. He's going to be moderating with me today, and then we will continue with the talk.
Hi, everybody. My name's Tim. I'm a student in my generalist year here. And so I have the easy job of sending this over to Nora and just letting her introduce herself to everybody.
Sure, thank you. And thank you, Nancy, for that really kind introduction. It was really nice of you to say. So I'm Nora Moran. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy at United Neighborhood Houses. And I guess just to give a little bit of background about, sort of how I ended up in this work and in this world. So my first job in the nonprofit world after college, but before I got my MSW, was actually doing, direct client work at an assisted living home. And I really liked that work. I really liked being able to work one-on-one with folks, got to kind of, see ways to help folks in their daily lives. but left that experience really feeling like I wanted to work to make the systems better that were, causing people to have to be in some sort of assisted living facility in the first place, as opposed to kind of wanting to work directly with folks. And so, when I went to get my MSW, I went to Hunter. I was in the community organizing track. Wasn't really sure kind of what I wanted my professional work to look like, but knew I was more interested in, some of the bigger picture macro issues. And I really got, kind of hooked into advocacy work in my second year field placement. I was placed at the UJA Federation, which is a foundation and, kind of umbrella group, I guess you might say, in New York City, working with a network of nonprofits in the city, and was in their government relations department and was able to kind of see, how coalitions worked, get to participate in some lobbying meetings, and really felt like that was what I wanted to do. And it was through, my contacts and experiences in that second year field placement that I, eventually wound up working at UNH. I started as a policy analyst and was working with our aging portfolio, and then had another position working at Safe Horizon for a little bit in their government affairs department, and then came back to UNH about a year and a half ago, and it's been a great experience ever since, and definitely feel like I use my social work skills pretty regularly and feel really passionately that social workers should be engaged in advocacy and really think about, whether or not that's something that they'd like to pursue and explore more in their careers.
And Nora, you started touching on this, but just to expand on that last thought of why is it important for social worker practitioners to develop these advocacy skills, and what exactly are those skills?
Yeah, so I'd say first, advocacy is definitely part of our profession's code of ethics. Engaging in social and political action, promoting social welfare, those are all things that are spelled out in the code of ethics. But I think more importantly, advocacy is one of the really important ways that social workers achieve lasting change and achieve really radical change. I think it's safe to say that a lot of us got into social work because we wanted to work with other people, we wanted to help them, maybe we wanted to make our communities or our neighborhoods better. But I think if we're really striving to do that and striving to help others, we have to look at the bigger context and systems that people are living in, and how those systems impact people's lives, and really think about how to change those in addition to just working one-on-one with a person or a family or a group. And I think for social workers, our clients are constantly impacted by the different societal systems and structures that they live in. And we know that oftentimes those systems are racist, they're sexist, they're ableist, homophobic, transphobic, and they play a really big role in how clients are able to live their day-to-day lives, access resources, be a part of their community. And if social workers are really, going to do that full and complete work with clients, we have to think about, what does collective advocacy look like to raise our voices and change the systems that are impacting people. And I think that, social workers also are in a really good position in that, we hear a lot of individual stories and, examples of ways that people's lives are, harmed by societal structures or harmed by institutions. And I think, social workers have an obligation to help people who are directly impacted plug into advocacy efforts as well. And I think, what are some of those skills? I would say, on a daily basis, I use, my knowledge of human behavior, of motivation and what drives people, and of, interpersonal relationships and dynamics, to navigate my day-to-day and my workday. I think one of the early concepts that we learn in social work school is about, person and environment. And that's something that social workers are really poised to kind of bring into an advocacy space. I think social workers make really good advocates because we can think about the ways that systems impact real people. And I think just to give like a real life example of this, This has come up a lot in my work over the last few weeks around vaccine rollout. Obviously, New York City and New York State are saying, oh, we really should probably like work with some CBOs to make sure that, people are able to sign up for the vaccine, that they have information about it. And most recently, the city kind of laid a plan out that said, well, when we go to vaccinate, older adults or people with disabilities, maybe who are homebound and aren't able to leave their home, we're going to send a fire department, a nurse, and maybe like a navigator out in teams of 3 to, go to people's doors and say, we'll be able to give you a COVID-19 vaccine. But it became clear that nobody really thought about, well, what's it been like to be a homebound person over the past year over COVID? How trustful or not are you going to be when someone shows up at your door to say, I'm here to give you a vaccine? Are you going to turn that person away or not? What kinds of languages are these, nurses and folks who are going out to give this vaccine? What languages do they speak? Who are the trusted CBO that has interaction with that older person? Do they know that this vaccine team is going out? Maybe not. Those are all things that, social workers who even are working closely and settle with, UNH and some of the settlement house case management and home delivered meal programs. That's color that they're able to give to policy decisions that I think is really important and makes, good policy decisions happen at the end of the day.
So when people think of lobbyists or lobbying, they think of, like backroom deals and all these bad things, dark bad things. But you are a lobbyist, right? So is lobbying a dirty word, and is it a dirty business? Can you elaborate on that for us?
Sure. So I would say first that it's technically a legal word. I am a lobbyist and I have to register to be a lobbyist with the city clerk's office and with JCOPE, which stands for the Joint Commission on Public Ethics at the state level. And that's a good thing. Like, I personally think that anybody who is influencing people in government to make a certain decision or pass a certain policy should have to disclose on the record, how much money and what efforts they're doing to influence that. Just because I work at a nonprofit, I think doesn't mean that, I shouldn't have to do that. So yes, I mean, I am a lobbyist. I think it's a good thing that we have these laws in place because it's important from a good government perspective for everybody to know who is it that's, influencing their government. And oftentimes, those people do have much more money than folks that working at a nonprofit. And there are certain things that, nonprofits do give up in exchange for their 501c3 tax status. We can't endorse candidates. We can't give candidates running for office any money. We have to be nonpartisan in all of our work. But I think that, overall, that's a good thing. And I think that there are, a lot of social workers and other grassroots organizers who are registered lobbyists because legally we meet the definition to do that. And I think about the question of, is it a dirty business? I think, is it any better or worse than, kind of other systems that people are working in? Not necessarily. Are there things that are uncomfortable that have happened? I'm sure lots of folks have been keeping up with all the news out of Albany over the past couple days. Sure, there are things that are, uncomfortable. And I also think, from a social worker perspective, particularly when we're trying to get, our clients and other folks involved in advocacy, we do also have a duty to really kind of train and warn people what it's going to be like to go to a legislative visit or things like that, because sometimes, elected officials do say things that are uncomfortable or triggering. And, we have to make sure that people are prepared for that and understand, the benefits of speaking up and how that is important overall.
And Nora, as a lobbyist, what would you say are some of the common misconceptions about lobbying and lobbyists?
Well, I definitely would say that there's sort of the misconception that it's, all lobbyists are bad, or that, everybody's kind of lobbying in support of bad things or, like more oil companies or whatever. Lots of lobbyists are supportive of, good progressive policies and are, trying to get, funding passed and things like that. I also think that another misconception is sometimes that, nonprofits don't or can't engage in advocacy at all, and that we're not, able to. This is something that I hear a lot working with, other community-based organizations, other nonprofits, especially when we're trying to build coalitions. I will hear people say, well, we can't really do that because, we're a nonprofit. We can't get involved in that. And that's not true. Nonprofits definitely are able to advocate and to raise their voices. Their staff they're able to, mobilize clients to get them involved in advocacy. Obviously it has to be nonpartisan, but, they're certainly able to engage in that. So I think that's definitely another misconception that I hear, and something that, I think social workers definitely have a role to play in pushing back against that. And even if, you're ever entering into a more administrative role, really, from an admin and management perspective, getting your organization involved in advocacy efforts, I think is always good.
And just like Liz said in the chat, please continue to ask questions in the chat and we'll get to them soon. And so would you mind describing at least one specific success and one failure in your work as a lobbyist?
Sure. So I'd say one success, pretty recently. So last summer, so I also should say at UNH, we do a lot of advocacy work around funding, because we represent a network of nonprofit organizations and a network of settlement houses. They largely rely on government funding to carry out their work. And so a lot of what we do at UNH is making sure that they, have enough money, that the money is able to be spent in ways that are, responsive to what their staff need to do, responsive to what clients need. And in some other, sometimes at UNH, we do some legislative advocacy. And I see in the chat, what does UNH stand for? United Neighborhood Houses. That's the organization that I work for. Sorry about that. We also do, I also in other professional roles have worked on some legislative campaigns to try and get some bills passed and things like that. But one success that I would say, last spring when, we were kind of at the height of COVID, the mayor decided to fully cut programming or funding for all summer youth programming. That looked like, after summer camp for elementary and middle school students, the summer youth employment program, which is a jobs program for young adults in New York City, as well as programming in some public housing developments. And that was, pretty radical, even though at the time we knew that, COVID was, it was really bad then and people weren't sure about transmission and things like that. We really knew that eliminating all funding and fully, kind of leaving kids on their own this summer would have been terrible. We saw children were just having a really hard time, and even young adults were having a really hard time with the abrupt closure of school, and felt like it was really important for there to be, some funding there for the summer for organizations to run youth programs. And we were successful in pushing back to restore half of that funding, which is pretty significant, given that, we were at zero, and the city also was under, definitely financial constraints, and they still are. But that was something that, I'm proud of, and UNH was engaged in a pretty big coalition of providers and really played a role in, thinking about what are the right stories to lift up to get, particularly Mayor de Blasio and the city council ready to kind of fight and push back in budget negotiations to make sure that this funding was restored. Really kind of thinking about what were all the tools at our disposal, lobbying visits, connecting parents to their city council members, thinking about the media and how to get reporters interested in this work to write about stories, things like that. So that's definitely was a success and something that, I was very proud of. And, something that I wish had gone a little bit differently, there's always kind of times when, we're not successful with getting funding back, things like that. But one other example I can think of is I worked previously, I used to work at Safe Horizon, which is a victim assistance organization. And we worked on a piece of legislation called the Child Victims Act, which wound up passing and reformed the statute of limitations for survivors of child sexual abuse. And it actually, it passed, and that was an amazing accomplishment. But one thing I wish that we had done a little bit differently, and a lesson I always carry in the back of my mind, is that, when you're doing advocacy, it's not enough to just win. You have to make sure that you're there to help the policy or the funding be implemented in the right way. And, right after the bill passed, we started getting all of these phone calls from people who, now were able to file a lawsuit in civil court, or were able to, go through this 1-year window in civil court to file an old claim against somebody who harmed you. And we, we're kind of scrambling to figure out, how do we help people answer these calls? Like, what are the right resources for them? And so that was kind of a reminder for me of, you always have to have a plan of how you're going to win. And then when you win, you also have to have a plan of how that win is going to be carried out in a way that's, good for our clients and for communities.
So we could move to the Q&A. I have one that,
Mhm.
let me see, that somebody sent just to me, so I could start with that, from Caitlin.
Sure.
She says, I'm a grad social work student in my specialized year. I also run a small nonprofit organization that works with and celebrates kids and teens with a variety of developmental disabilities / neurodiverse young people. We are often advocating, but have not organized this effort. My question, how could an organization like mine begin to make connections with other CBOs, possibly working on similar issues / are like-minded?
That's a good question, and I think a good reminder that while it's important to do kind of advocacy individually and maybe with your own organization, there's always strength in numbers, and those connections that you can build to other groups always helps. And I think one of the ways to start is, I would say, if you know of other similar organizations to yours, asking them, what kinds of efforts are you involved in? Are there other groups that we should be, engaged with and plugging into? I also find sometimes using, if the district that you're in and your local elected official, to asking them and using them, hey, we want to be, connected to other nonprofits that do similar work to ours. Do you know of any resources or other groups that we could be speaking with? Sometimes when we're doing coalition work, not only do we get outreach from other organizations, but we also get referrals from elected officials saying, hey, you really should partner with this group. I'd say another, honestly, another good resource in a lot of ways is Google, and just kind of figuring out what are other groups in your area, kind of depending on where you're located. If you're in New York City, another thing that is often helpful is watching city council hearings and seeing, particularly if they're on a topic that you're interested in. And now that we're in the Zoom age, they're all streamed on their website, and just seeing, who are the other groups that come to testify, and might I want to reach out to them. That's that lots of advocates who are more seasoned at this work often go to those hearings and offer testimony on different topics. And so that would be another route to go as well.
And I have
Yeah,
another question here. So it says, do you find that social workers are often up against people with law, business, etc. degrees when it comes to finding jobs in policy and or nonprofit leadership? If so, what are some tips and tricks to show that we are equally equipped to do this type of work? And that coincides with another questions that I believe students are having about what are certain skills that they can build in the policy area to get social work jobs.
Yeah, it's a good question, and certainly for some jobs, we are competing with people with other kinds of degrees, or even people just with master's degrees, or not master's, bachelor's degrees, or maybe not even that, but who have experience kind of working in government already. Something that we see happen a lot is, people who work as a staffer for an elected official and then try to, kind of come over to the advocacy side of things. And, I think good, ways to show that social workers are equipped to do this work is really, making the case for yourself that you have those skills of, assessment, being able to kind of read a room and look at other people and kind of understand, what perspectives they're bringing. I also think, the fact that, social workers are just able to show empathy with other people, to make people feel seen and supported. That is really important in advocacy work, just as it is in, kind of working one-on-one with clients. Also, depending on the topic, social workers, especially if you have experience kind of working in direct service, that I think is super valuable when it comes to doing policy work. Something that I look for in hiring is definitely, depending on what the topic is, experience in that, that area, whether it's, somebody who has worked in a youth development program, and, has run an after school program. And so knows from a policy perspective, all the different regulatory issues around after school and how to streamline those. If it's someone in aging, somebody who's worked in a senior center, I think is really valuable. And, who has, kind of done that one-on-one work with clients, and can bring that perspective to the policy work. I think it also shows a high level of motivation that you care about the topic and the issue. I think that passion certainly can't be discounted, and interest, especially in a topic or population or issue area, goes a long way, as opposed to somebody who's maybe has a law degree, or a business degree and is maybe just kind of interested in more of the government affairs type work and liaising with government, as opposed to like really digging in on the substance and the content.
So I think Liz kind of condensed a few questions about, let me see, about, employment and stuff. So if anybody has follow-up questions on that, please ask that in the chat, but I think we're going to jump around. So Liz Matthews said, there are so many social issues to tackle. How do you go about prioritizing or selecting where to focus your advocacy? Once you've done this, what helps you make this initial move from ideas into action?
That's a really good question, and something that I struggle with constantly, because at least from UNH's perspective, the settlement houses that we represent do a little bit of everything. They're running early childhood programs, after school, senior centers, food pantries, workforce development programs, adult literacy classes, recreation and fitness classes, like you name it, they're doing it. And so, we could work on so many different issues, because there's a lot that impacts settlement houses and a lot that settlement houses are involved and engaged in. From our perspective, we really, because we are a nonprofit that represents other nonprofits, we try to look at, what kinds of work do those other nonprofits do? What programs are they running? What do they care about? To take direction in terms of, our work overall, and the kinds of things that we prioritize in our advocacy and the different kinds of topics and issues that we look at. One of the things that we also really think about when we're kind of selecting our issues, is, who else is in this space and doing this work? If there is a similar organization working on youth workforce issues, maybe we wouldn't get really involved in that. Another example where we come into this a lot is housing, right? There's a lot of folks in the housing space, both from, building new housing, building supportive housing, preserving housing units, tenant issues, there's a lot there. And so when we think about, getting involved in advocacy, we also try to look at what are other coalitions and campaigns that are already running. Are those things that we can join up with them to, have a greater impact and support their efforts. Or, if there's an idea that nobody is really working on, how do we take that on, ourselves and kind of lead that effort to lift up a new issue that, is not always being advocated on by other people. And then another, way that we really kind of think about, how we do our work is we talk a lot to the staff, and often those people are social workers at settlement houses who are running programs and trying to figure out, what are the common issues that they're seeing. And if we hear from, somebody in the Bronx that they're, having a hard time, getting food out and filling the food in their food pantries, and we hear the same thing in Queens, then we're kind of able to say, okay, let's look into this a little bit more. And if it's a citywide issue and something that's impacting every settlement house, then we try to incorporate it into our advocacy. And then, I'd also say sometimes it just involves like doing research and trying to figure out, what policies are out there already, what funding, has government already allocated to figure out, is this a problem that has a solution and maybe that law isn't being enforced? Or, do we need to kind of create something new or, or fix something that currently exists? Oh.
I'm hearing you express the importance of partnerships a lot in these answers, which I think it's a big social work skill of building relationships and connecting and assessing that need. So to move on to the next question from Nancy, it's, can you talk about the social work skills involved in coalition work?
Nancy, I wonder why you asked this question. So yes, and actually one of the things I wrote in my notes when I was preparing for this was that group facilitation is key for social workers who are doing advocacy work. So a lot of the time, also because when you just think about the political landscape in New York City and all the different issues that are at play, and everything that council members and the mayor have to think about on a daily basis, just logically, it makes sense for multiple voices saying the same thing to join together. So that way, there's so many people saying this that government can't ignore it. But that often comes with challenges, and I'm sorry, there's the siren outside. That often comes with challenges because, getting lots of different people who are passionate about an issue on the same page to advocate together, often can be challenging. I think some of the dynamics that you see in, if you're running a client group, absolutely play out in coalition work. At the end of the day, I think people want to know, if they're part of a group, that they are, important and that their time is valued, that, they feel connected to other people and like you're moving together toward a common goal. And those are all things that are, social workers are able to do. I don't know, at Hunter, they had a class about group facilitation. I don't know if they still do at Fordham, or if they do at Fordham. But that's something that, I think definitely, if you're interested in advocacy work, should definitely, figure out how to get some exposure to, facilitation training and things like that. Even just thinking about how to make an agenda for a coalition meeting, how to run it, and how to, redirect if conversation kind of goes off in a fully different direction, which happens a lot. How do you help people feel motivated to stay focused on one topic or issue? I think getting back to a question that was raised earlier, like there's so much out there, how do you pick? Something that I've also seen in coalitions is like, there's so many problems and we're going to try to solve all of them. And that's, hard. And I think sometimes thinking about, how do you stay focused to fix one thing and prioritize one change before moving on to the next, is also something that's really important and necessary in coalition work. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what else, but it's, yeah, a huge, huge skill. I would say most of the advocacy work that I do at United Neighborhood Houses is in conjunction with other organizations. And so, I really have to figure out how to, bring peers together and make everybody feel like they're all on the same page and good about our advocacy agenda. And also that they trust me, to take direction from me when I say, hey, I really need you to, call these 3 city council members, or, we're having a hard time getting this person signed onto a bill. Can you help? It also comes with like building that relationship up with everybody in your coalition. So that way there's that mutual respect. And, when the time comes that you need them to assist or maybe play a different role, they're ready and able to do that.
So something I thought of was, so obviously we are in the middle of a pandemic, and how has that changed advocacy for you and your organization? Has that opened it up to more people, or has it closed it? And how does it look now versus how it looked 13 months ago?
Yeah. That's I think the like Zoom world definitely translated into the lobbying and advocacy world. A lot of Zoom, and a lot of phone calls. I think there have been pros and cons to the pandemic and sort of how it's shaped our advocacy tactics. We definitely are able to engage more people in our advocacy. And I also just think generally, New Yorkers are more keyed into kind of what's happening at the city and state level than they ever have been, because we're all just home, and like some people are just glued to Twitter all day and are kind of following developments, pretty quickly as they're happening. Like something I often kind of think back to is, after George Floyd's murder, there was a lot of attention to, what are different cities doing around policing and police budgets. And, the New York City Council was, had to negotiate a budget by July 1st, because that's sort of legally when the city's fiscal year ends and starts again. There was a lot of people lobbying council members to say divert funding from the NYPD. It's really important. And that was huge. And I think if people were not, remote, if they didn't feel comfortable using social media, that would not have happened. But what New Yorker kind of knows that the city budget has to be passed by July 1st? Well, probably just me and like the handful of other nerds we hang out with at City Hall. So I think that definitely was a real shift, and a good one. There were like hundreds of people watching the live stream of the city council budget vote. Normally there's like 15, 20 people, and all kind of people in suits hanging around at City Hall who do this professionally. But I think that COVID's really kind of opened up access to elected officials, because people can Zoom in from anywhere. And I've also noticed that, elected officials are taking more meetings or kind of doing more Zooms and things like that, because it's easier. There's definitely a drawback in terms of mental health, because if you're just Zooming all day, it gets to be a little overwhelming, as I'm sure lots of you know. But that's definitely been a good thing. One of the cons, though, and challenges is that, we used to do a lot where we'd gather in person, and I think visually, bringing a group of students to City Hall to protest against budget cuts, or, having staging a mock election in support of a voting rights bill. Those were all, very kind of visual things that we were able to do easily before COVID, and we're not able to now. So that's, definitely hard. And I think there is something kind of lost in our advocacy, because, it's a lot easier, or it's harder to ignore an issue when somebody is, there right in front of you. I think on Zoom, it's a little bit easier for people to say, thanks for coming, we're fighting for you. And not really engage with, the requests or the information that people are bringing you and your constituents are bringing you. And I'd also say you have to use social media much more than we ever did before. even because, as someone who, does advocacy work professionally, a lot of the way that I would get information or, think about strategies or how to move things was just bumping into, council members or other elected officials, other advocates in person at City Hall, either, listening to a hearing or going to a meeting in legislative offices. And so that doesn't happen now. So it's definitely changed, just how proactive we have to be in our outreach to, different council members and state legislators, because otherwise, we don't see them in person anymore. And that's a big shift from a couple months ago.
I like how you had mentioned some pros of both the Zoom world and in person, and hopefully in a few months we'll find that nice balance between the two. So there's another question that goes back to coalition work that says, what is the best way to find and approach an advocacy group you think would be of use to your organization or coalition?
Yeah, so I think, building off of some of the things that I shared earlier, looking at talking first to other colleagues and kind of hearing from them, are you involved in any advocacy efforts that we can get involved in? Also, using the internet and kind of researching things and reaching out that way. I think that if an organization comes to us and says, we want to help, we want to get more involved, I don't think any advocate would say no, thank you. We're kind of always looking to build our efforts to get more, organizations and people involved and engaged. So that is, something that's always welcome. I'm also seeing this question in the chat about how social workers working as direct practitioners can stay involved, which I think is a really good one, and something that is hard. And even talking with friends and colleagues of mine who are kind of direct practitioners and working one-on-one with clients or in groups with clients, definitely say it's a challenge. I think that there's a couple things that can happen. Even find out at your organization whether or not you have an infrastructure for that, and whether or not that's something that your organization engages in. I would say, from my perspective up here, if there is a social worker who's in a, working in a program who wants to support advocacy efforts to help clients, tell their stories and get involved, like, that's great. I'm only so good as a messenger, and that, I'm not always directly impacted by a lot of the things that I'm advocating for. But the advocacy message often goes farther when I'm able to advocate with, or even just kind of hand a meeting over to somebody who really is able to speak passionately and from their lived experience about a policy or an issue. So I'd say first, find out what's happening at your organization, and see if you can get plugged into it. If there's no infrastructure at your organization, I'd think about starting it. We have, some settlement houses that we work with who in recent years have started an advocacy committee of staff within the organization. And it's, sort of an extra part of their job, but something that they're all really passionate about. And they meet consistently to think about, what hearings do we want to testify at as an organization? What do we want to invite our elected officials to come to our organization to see or do or listen to? How do we get our clients, out and voting and engaging in elections in a nonpartisan way? Those are all things that I think are really important. And then I'd say personally, make sure that you are registered to vote. New York City has a huge election coming up in just a couple months. The Mayor de Blasio is term limited. 2/3 of the city council are term limited. Most borough presidents and the comptroller are all term limited. So there are new people coming into these seats. And, we also are going to be using a ranked choice voting system for the first time, which is pretty significant. So, would definitely say personally, make sure you're registered to vote, know who represents you where you live, know who your, council member, state legislators, congressperson are, It's just always good to know that. I've heard people ask that in interview questions. So particularly if people are interested in advocacy. And then I'd also say, you know, another way to get involved is definitely to think just sort of in your personal time about volunteering on political campaigns. That's another way I've seen social workers get their foot in the door, particularly when they're trying to find a job in the advocacy world, and a way to kind of build your resume to get some volunteer experience around, you know, grassroots organizing and canvassing and things like that. And there's one other thing I was going to say, and I don't remember what it is now. Oh, last thing I will say, you know, people have lots of feelings and opinions about the NASW. I know it is an expensive group to join. They do also have a 501c4, which is or like kind of like a arm of a nonprofit that is able to give money and endorse political candidates. And you don't have to be a dues paying member of the NASW to get involved with their political action committee. And, you know, they have elected officials come and, you know, talk about their work, and they, you know, advocate on behalf of different things that are important to social workers. So that's, you know, another route to go as well, if you are interested in kind of keeping this up, even if you're doing direct practice work.
Can I, Tim, can I just jump in and add something on that? I just want to kind of reinforce what Nora said. When I was running an organization, there was nothing that would thrill me more than if I heard from one of the social work staff that they wanted to get involved in advocacy, or they wanted to get more, they wanted to do something over and above what their at least job responsibilities were laid out to be. So I would say you should never be shy about saying to your supervisor or your supervisor's supervisor, or even the executive director, I'd like to get involved in whatever the organization is doing around policy and advocacy. And many of them are doing stuff and not everybody knows about it. So, and then, you know, and then the executive director will like you even more.
I was going to say, Nora, what you said. I just went to my first PACE meet, NYC PACE meeting on, when was it? Last Thursday. And I learned about that through the activism committee. So it feels like you really get to know these things by getting involved, and then, you know, they're all connected in some way. So, and also people are all welcome to join the action committee or the activism committee specifically. So we had another question come in earlier from Perla, and she said, does your agency utilize telehealth to facilitate the distribution of resources?
So United Neighborhood Houses doesn't do any sort of direct service work or direct work with clients, but a lot of the settlement houses that we work with are using telehealth right now. They've pretty much had to take a lot of their programs online because, you know, meeting in person wasn't safe, and they, you know, really kind of figured out how to do that work quickly. But, you know, for us as an organization as well, you know, we have really had to rely more on email, on phone calls, on Zoom to kind of get our information out there, both from an advocacy perspective, and, you know, kind of the other half of what my organization does is like capacity building and support for the settlement houses. So professional development opportunities, trainings, and all that stuff had to go online as well. And we really kind of had to rethink, you know, not just putting our work online, but how do we adapt some of that to modify to be kind of in a virtual environment? Because I think, you know, one of the things we learned probably too late in the pandemic was that, like, it's not enough to just sort of take your work onto Zoom and do it in the same way. But, you know, you have to think about how long are your meetings, maybe make them a little shorter. You know, how do you kind of script things so that way you don't have those like awkward Zoom pauses when people don't know who's supposed to speak next. Those were all things, you know, we just did a pretty big virtual state lobby day, and Nancy was telling me that the NASW did one with some students as well. And we had to like really rethink a lot of how we did that because, you know, it's hard to kind of just take what we would do in person, which was like a lot of meetings with a script, and put it online. And so we had to figure out how to tweak that a little bit.
So I do see we have about 5 minutes left. I just want to put in this one last question. That is, how can someone who is new to the field of social work learn to resolve their anxiety regarding advocacy with community agencies or even with the agency that they work with?
So I'd say two things. One is that I think it's always important to remember that people in government aren't necessarily smarter than us or know more. They just kind of happen to be in the position that they're in. And so I think we all should remember, we are experts in the work that we do, and that expertise is what we bring into, legislative meetings and things like that. And we should never discount that. I think folks would probably be really surprised if I told them the number of times that I've asked, a council member to support something, and they'll say, okay, can you just write that letter for me and I'll put my name on it? And it's like, wait, I'm doing your work for you. Shouldn't you know about this and be able to write the letter and, kind of do it perfectly? But that's not always the case. And so, first I'd say, like, we have a lot of really good experience and background and knowledge as social workers. And that's something that, a lot of elected officials don't have. And so they do look to us as advocates to help teach them and educate them on what the issues are. And then, in terms of, maybe feeling uncomfortable within your own organization or things like that, I think we need to think sometimes about, this is an extension of the work that we can do one-on-one with clients. If a client sort of expressed that they needed something, this came up a lot recently, kids who needed remote learning devices. Obviously, if there was a way for, you as a social worker to get that remote learning device, you're going to figure out a way to do it. I think advocacy kind of is an extension of that, whatever it is, even if it's something that a client doesn't express that they, specifically need. It's important to, do advocacy work to build on that, because it's kind of what's, the only thing at the end of the day that's going to get our field, to be able to solve some of the problems that we're trying to solve. I really think about direct service or direct practice work and advocacy as related, because we both need each other in order to actually accomplish change at the end of the day.
Nora, I want to thank you. We just have a few minutes left, so I'm going to say something quick, then pass it on to Tim and then Nancy. But something that came up for me that I learned in this conversation was, even if you're a clinician for 40 years or X amount of years, you have all the skills that you would need to be a great advocate. So that was my takeaway. I appreciate this talk. Thank you. And I will pass it on to Tim.
So thank you, Nora, for coming, and thanks for everybody for attending. I was just going to pass the baton on to Nancy to if she had anything to say before we go.
Oh, yeah. One of the things I want to say is that for those of you who are interested in, who are going to be graduating in May or soon thereafter, I'm going to do a professional development workshop for students who are interested in jobs in policy and advocacy in government. And I'm going to do that on Tuesday, March 23rd at the lunchtime for those students who take classes on Tuesdays. And you know what, we can, we through the activism committee, we can send out a notice about that as well. So there's certain websites and certain ways you can go about looking for these kinds of jobs. And I'll just close by saying, I just really want to validate another point that Nora made about when you are looking for a job to do this kind of work, having some real grounding and some real passion for the topic you're interested in goes a long way. That the reason that I hired Nora for the first time at UNH is because when she was at Hunter, and this was for a position, I say this to all the, every time I do this workshop, Nora, I use you as an example, that we were looking for a policy analyst on the subject of older adults and aging. So I was looking for somebody who just wasn't going to come in and tell me, I'm interested in this because I love my grandmother, but for some real evidence that this person had shown some interest. In Nora, when she was at Hunter School of Social Work, had organized, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, like a day-long conference on older adults, or the challenges of aging in social work, and that's what tipped the balance for me, is to say, okay, I want somebody who cares about this issue. Her resume showed that she did, and she wasn't just faking it to get the job. So there you go. But I'll tell you more about that at the professional development workshop on the 23rd. So thank you, Nora.
Nancy.
It's great. It's just the more social workers we can get involved in policy, advocacy, government, I think the better it'll be for the world. That's all I'll say.
Hear, hear. Could not agree more. And thank you. That was really kind of you to say. And I also think, you never know what it is that is going to stand out on your resume. And I think that's exactly right. Those things that show that you're really passionate about an issue, even if it's a class that you took, is great and goes a long way when you're trying to demonstrate in this field that you have passion and knowledge about a subject area. And that goes a really long way when you're trying to do policy work.